Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I didn't grow up around luxury. Linen tablecloths and crystal glasses weren't part of my world. My mother worked double shifts at a nursing home, and my father left before I learned how to tie my shoes. We survived on secondhand furniture and hand-me-down winter coats. So when I married into a family that valued status like oxygen, I knew I'd always be different. My husband, Daniel, used to say that was what he loved about me. He said I was real, that I didn't care about appearances, that he made me feel grounded, and for a long time I believed him. His mother, Lorraine, never quite agreed. From the very first Sunday dinner, she looked at me like I was a stain on her imported rug. She never said anything outright cruel. Oh no, Lorraine preferred precision. She'd compliment my simple taste. She'd ask if I was comfortable in certain restaurants. She once offered to help me pick out a more suitable dress for a charity gala. Always with a smile, always within earshot of someone important. Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Ignore her." But ignoring someone doesn't stop them from slowly carving you out of your own life. The dinner in question was supposed to celebrate Daniel's promotion, senior vice president. It was a big deal. He had worked hard for it, and I was proud, genuinely proud. I had stayed up with him through late nights, listened to him rehearse presentations, held him when deals fell through. We were a team. At least, I thought we were. Lorraine insisted on hosting the celebration. She chose La Maribel, a place so exclusive you needed a reservation weeks in advance and a credit limit high enough to make your palms sweat. When Daniel told me, he sounded almost apologetic. You know how she is. She just wants to show off a little. I smiled and told him it was fine. I even bought a new dress, navy blue, elegant but understated. I didn't want to give her anything to critique. The night of the dinner, I arrived 10 minutes early. I like being early. It gives me time to breathe. The restaurant was glowing, soft gold lighting, the faint sound of a piano drifting from somewhere near the bar. Everything smelled like butter and white wine and money. I spotted Lorraine immediately. She was standing near the hostess stand, draped in emerald silk, diamonds catching the light every time she moved her head. A cluster of Daniel's colleagues surrounded her. She looked pleased, commanding. Daniel stood beside her, handsome in his tailored suit. When he saw me, he smiled, relieved almost. I walked toward them, steady and calm. Lorraine's eyes flicked over me from head to toe. "Oh," she said lightly, "you made it." The way she said it, like she hadn't expected me to. "Of course," I replied, "wouldn't miss it." She gave a tight smile. "Well, there's been a small adjustment." I felt something in my stomach shift. We had to change the seating arrangement. The table in the private room only seats 8 comfortably, and with Daniel's executive team attending, space is limited. I blinked. 8? Yes, Daniel, myself, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, the CFO and his wife, and 2 board members. Then, she added casually, we've arranged a separate table for you just outside the private room. You'll still be able to see everyone. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. A separate table? I repeated. Yes, she nodded as if explaining something to a child. It's just logistics, dear. These business discussions can be quite technical. I wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Daniel shifted beside her. He avoided my eyes. And that hurt more than anything she said. "I thought this was a celebration," I said quietly. "It is, for Daniel's achievement, and networking is part of that." I looked at my husband. "Daniel?" He exhaled. "It's just for dinner, Em. It's not a big deal. We'll go home together." Not a big deal. Standing there in front of his colleagues, being gently exiled from the table, not a big deal? I felt heat creep up my neck, but I refused to let my voice shake. "So I'm invited, just not included," I said slowly. Lorraine's smile sharpened. "Don't be dramatic." That word, dramatic, the favorite weapon of people who want you silent. The hostess approached, unaware of the tension. "Your private room is ready, Miss Bennet." She turned gracefully. "Wonderful." She gestured for the others to follow. Daniel hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then he followed his mother inside. I stood there alone. The hostess gave me a sympathetic look. "Your table is this way, ma'am." She led me to a small two-person table just outside the frosted glass doors of the private room. Through the blur, I could see silhouettes, hear faint laughter, the clink of glasses raised to toast. I sat down slowly. A waiter poured water into my glass. "Can I start you with a cocktail?" I almost laughed. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the door. It wasn't about the seat. It wasn't even about the dinner. It was about being erased, publicly, strategically. And suddenly, something Lorraine had said months earlier echoed in my mind. She'd mentioned La Maribel in passing. She'd bragged about knowing the owner personally, about exclusive access. But I knew something she didn't. 2 years ago, before Daniel's career took off, I volunteered at a community literacy program downtown. One of the parents who attended our events was a quiet, soft-spoken man named Victor Laurent. We'd spent hours organizing fundraisers together. He told me once, almost sheepishly, that he owned a small restaurant. La Maribel wasn't small, and Victor wasn't just the owner, he was the majority shareholder. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered for a moment. I'm not impulsive by nature. I believe in choosing peace whenever possible. But peace doesn't mean accepting humiliation. I scrolled to Victor's contact. We hadn't spoken in months, but he'd insisted I keep his number. "If you ever need anything," he'd kindly said, "don't hesitate." I typed a simple message. "Hi, Victor. I'm at La Maribel tonight. I'm so sorry to bother you, but may I speak with you for a moment if you're available?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Inside the private room, I heard another round of laughter. Glasses clinked again. I imagined Lorraine raising a toast, probably praising her son, probably pretending I didn't exist. My phone buzzed almost instantly. "I'm here tonight. Of course, I'll be right out." I inhaled slowly. Through the frosted glass, I saw movement. The door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Not Daniel, not a waiter. Victor. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. Surprise flickered across his face, then warmth. "Emily," he said gently. And at that exact moment, Lorraine turned her head from inside the private room and saw him walking toward me. The color drained from her face. Victor reached my table with the same quiet steadiness I remembered from those long afternoons at the literacy center. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, but there was nothing flashy about him. He carried himself like a man who didn't need to announce his importance. It simply followed him. "Emily," he said again, offering his hand. "It's been too long." I stood to greet him, grateful for the grounding feel of his handshake. "It has. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." He smiled softly. "You could never be an interruption." Through the glass, I saw Lorraine stiffen. Daniel had noticed too now. He leaned slightly toward his mother, whispering something I couldn't hear. Victor glanced at the private room, then back at me. "You're seated out here?" he asked gently. There was no judgment in his voice, only observation. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone calm. It seems there was limited space. His gaze sharpened just a fraction. I see. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Would you walk with me for a moment? He asked. I hesitated. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, but I also wasn't willing to keep shrinking. Yes, I said. We took only a few steps toward the private room before the door swung open abruptly. Lorraine emerged, her smile polished and brittle. "Victor," she said brightly, extending both hands toward him. "What a delightful surprise! I had no idea you were here tonight." He accepted her greeting politely but without warmth. "Miss Bennet." "You remember me, of course," she continued, her voice sugary. "We've dined here many times. I've recommended La Mirabelle to all my friends." "I'm aware," Victor replied evenly. She glanced at me, then back at him. "Is there a problem? Emily can be a bit sensitive. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." There it was again, that wordless dismissal, the subtle framing of me as irrational. Victor's expression didn't change. Emily reached out to me. I always make time for my friends. Lorraine blinked. "Friends?" "Yes," he said calmly. "We've worked together on several community initiatives." The way he said it, worked together, carried weight, equal weight. Lorraine's composure flickered. "Oh," she said lightly, "well, how lovely. We're just having a small celebration for my son's promotion. Very exclusive, executive-level discussions, you understand." Victor's eyes drifted to the frosted glass doors, then back at me, standing beside him. "Exclusive," he repeated. "Yes," Lorraine affirmed. "We had to be very strategic with seating." Victor nodded slowly. "Of course. Seating is important." A silence stretched between them. Then he turned to me. "Emily, would you prefer to join your party inside?" Before I could answer, Lorraine cut in. "Oh, that won't be necessary. Everything is already arranged." Victor looked at her, and for the first time there was steel beneath his calm. "I wasn't asking you." The air shifted. Lorraine's lips parted slightly. I felt Daniel's presence behind the glass, watching. Victor turned fully to me again. "This is your evening too, isn't it?" The question landed softly, but it struck deep. I swallowed. "I thought it was." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "Then please," he said gently, gesturing toward the private room door. Before Lorraine could protest, Victor reached for the handle and opened it wide. The room fell silent instantly. 8 faces turned toward us. Crystal glasses hovered mid-air. Conversations died in unfinished sentences. Daniel stood slowly. "Victor," he said clearly, stop. Victor reached my table with the same quiet steadiness I remembered from those long afternoons at the Literacy Center. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, but there was nothing flashy about him. He carried himself like a man who didn't need to announce his importance. It simply followed him. "Emily," he said again, offering his hand. "It's been too long." I stood to greet him, grateful for the grounding feel of his handshake. "It has. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." He smiled softly. "You could never be an interruption." Through the glass, I saw Lorraine stiffen. Daniel had noticed too now. He leaned slightly toward his mother, whispering something I couldn't hear. Victor glanced at the private room, then back at me. "You're seated out here?" he asked gently. There was no judgment in his voice, only observation. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone calm. It seems there was limited space. His gaze sharpened just a fraction. I see. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Would you walk with me for a moment? He asked. I hesitated. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, but I also wasn't willing to keep shrinking. Yes, I said. We took only a few steps toward the private room before the door swung open abruptly. Lorraine emerged, her smile polished and brittle. "Victor," she said brightly, extending both hands toward him. "What a delightful surprise! I had no idea you were here tonight." He accepted her greeting politely but without warmth. "Miss Bennet." "You remember me, of course," she continued, her voice sugary. "We've dined here many times. I've recommended La Mirabelle to all my friends." "I'm aware," Victor replied evenly. She glanced at me, then back at him. "Is there a problem? Emily can be a bit sensitive. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." There it was again, that wordless dismissal, the subtle framing of me as irrational. Victor's expression didn't change. Emily reached out to me. I always make time for my friends. Lorraine blinked. "Friends?" "Yes," he said calmly. "We've worked together on several community initiatives." The way he said it, worked together, carried weight, equal weight. Lorraine's composure flickered. "Oh," she said lightly, "well, how lovely. We're just having a small celebration for my son's promotion. Very exclusive, executive-level discussions, you understand." Victor's eyes drifted to the frosted glass doors, then back at me, standing beside him. "Exclusive," he repeated. "Yes," Lorraine affirmed. "We had to be very strategic with seating." Victor nodded slowly. "Of course. Seating is important." A silence stretched between them. Then he turned to me. "Emily, would you prefer to join your party inside?" Before I could answer, Lorraine cut in. "Oh, that won't be necessary. Everything is already arranged." Victor looked at her, and for the first time there was steel beneath his calm. "I wasn't asking you." The air shifted. Lorraine's lips parted slightly. I felt Daniel's presence behind the glass, watching. Victor turned fully to me again. "This is your evening too, isn't it?" The question landed softly, but it struck deep. I swallowed. "I thought it was." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "Then please," he said gently, gesturing toward the private room door. Before Lorraine could protest, Victor reached for the handle and opened it wide. The room fell silent instantly. 8 faces turned toward us. Crystal glasses hovered mid-air. Conversations died in unfinished sentences. Daniel stood slowly. "Victor," he said, clearly startled, "I didn't realize you were here." "I own the building, Daniel," Victor replied mildly. "I'm often here." A ripple of awkward laughter passed around the table. Lorraine stepped in quickly. "Victor was just checking on us. Such attentive service." He ignored that. Instead, he addressed the room. "I understand this is a celebration." "Yes," Daniel answered, glancing at me with confusion and something else. Guilt, maybe. Victor's expression didn't change. "Emily reached out to me. I always make time for my friends." Lorraine blinked. "Friends?" "Yes," he said calmly. "We've worked together on several community initiatives." The way he said it, worked together, carried weight, equal weight. Lorraine's composure flickered. "Oh," she said lightly, Well, how lovely. We're just having a small celebration for my son's promotion. Very exclusive, executive-level discussions, you understand. Victor's eyes drifted to the frosted glass doors, then back at me standing beside him. Exclusive, he repeated. Yes, Lorraine affirmed. Dinner continued, but the air in that private room never fully recovered. The laughter was more restrained. The jokes felt measured. Every time someone glanced at me, it carried a new awareness, like they were seeing me for the first time instead of looking through me. Daniel tried to resume his role as the confident executive being celebrated. He spoke about quarterly projections, upcoming expansion plans, and strategic partnerships. His voice was steady, practiced, but I could feel the tension in him, the slight stiffness in his shoulders whenever Lorraine shifted in her chair. And Lorraine, she was quieter than I had ever seen her. Not embarrassed exactly. Lorraine didn't embarrass easily, but recalculating. She kept her chin lifted, her back straight, but her eyes avoided mine. Every so often I caught her studying Daniel instead, searching his face for something. Approval, maybe. Alignment. But Daniel didn't look at her the way he used to. Not that night. When dessert arrived, something delicate and layered with spun sugar, I realized I wasn't even hungry. My appetite had been replaced by something else. Not triumph, not revenge. Clarity. For years, I had convinced myself that if I were patient enough, kind enough, accommodating enough, Lorraine would eventually accept me. I had mistaken endurance for strength. I had believed that keeping peace meant absorbing discomfort silently. But sitting at that table, at the head where I had never expected to sit, I understood something new. Respect isn't given to those who wait quietly for it. It's claimed by those who refuse to be erased. When the evening finally ended, guests stood and exchanged business cards, compliments were offered, handshakes lingered. A few of Daniel's colleagues approached me directly. "It was lovely to finally meet you properly," one of the board members said. "Daniel speaks highly of you." I glanced at my husband. He nodded. "I do." There was something almost apologetic in his eyes. Lorraine gathered her shawl carefully. "We'll see you both on Sunday," she said crisply, as though nothing unusual had occurred. Her tone was controlled, polished, but beneath it, I sensed something simmering. Daniel and I walked to the valet in near silence. The night air was cool, wrapping around us like a reset button. Once inside the car, doors closed, engine humming softly, Daniel exhaled heavily. "I didn't know she'd arranged it like that," he said. I turned slightly toward him. "You didn't ask." He flinched, not dramatically, but enough. "I assumed," he began. "Yes," I said gently. "You assumed." Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was reflective. He gripped the steering wheel. "I thought it would just be easier, for work, for appearances." "And what about for me?" I asked quietly. That question lingered in the car like a third presence. Daniel swallowed. "I didn't think it would hurt you that much." I studied his profile, the man I had married, the man who once stayed up all night assembling a bookshelf with me because I insisted we didn't need to hire someone, the man who used to defend me gently but firmly when Lorraine made cutting remarks. Somewhere along the line, he had learned to compromise with her instead of confront her, and somewhere along the line, I had allowed it. "It's not about the table." I said finally. It's about being treated like I'm optional. You're not optional, he immediately replied. But I was seated outside. He had no answer for that. When we pulled into our driveway, neither of us moved to get out right away. I'm sorry, he said eventually, and this time it felt less like a reflex and more like recognition. I know, I said, but apologies, I had learned, were only meaningful if they were followed by change. The next few days were unusually quiet. Lorraine didn't call. She didn't send her usual Sunday dinner reminder. The family group chat remained still. Daniel seemed distracted, thoughtful. Twice I caught him staring at his phone as if considering something and then locking the screen again. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Lorraine. I let it ring once more before answering. Hello, Lorraine. Her voice was composed, but the edges were sharper than usual. Emily, I thought we should speak. I sat down at the kitchen table. About? About what happened at the restaurant. I waited. She sighed, a sound carefully constructed to imply reasonableness. I believe things escalated unnecessarily. Did they? I asked calmly. You embarrassed me. The honesty of it almost startled me. You embarrassed me? I repeated softly. Yes, in front of Daniel's colleagues, in front of Victor. I let a pause stretch between us. Lorraine, I said finally. I was seated outside my husband's celebration. It was a seating arrangement. It was a message. Silence. She shifted tactics. You know how important optics are in Daniel's field. I was protecting his image. By excluding his wife? Another silence. You've always been sensitive, she said carefully. There it was again. This time I didn't let it pass. No, I said evenly. I have been quiet. She inhaled sharply. I have tried very hard to fit into this family. I have accepted comments, suggestions, corrections. I have smiled through things that hurt, but I won't accept being publicly sidelined. Her voice cooled. So what is it you want? An apology? I considered that. I want acknowledgement, I said, that I belong. There was a long pause on the line. I could almost hear her pride wrestling with her practicality. You are Daniel's wife. Of course you belong. That's not the same thing. Another pause. I don't think we'll ever see eye to eye, she said stiffly. Maybe not, but we can still choose respect. She didn't respond immediately. Finally, she said, Sunday dinner is at 6. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't warmth, but it wasn't dismissal either. It was adjustment. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He found me on the back porch, watching the sky shift from gold to violet. I spoke to my mother, he said, sitting beside me. And? I told her that if you're not welcome at the table, I'm not either. I looked at him. He met my eyes steadily. She didn't like it, he admitted, but she heard me. Something inside me softened, not completely, not blindly, but enough. Thank you, I said quietly. He reached for my hand. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were on the same side again. But families don't transform overnight. Patterns don't dissolve because of one dramatic dinner. Sunday would come, and with it, another test. Sunday arrived with the kind of stillness that feels deceptive. The sky was pale and cloudless, the air crisp enough to carry the scent of early autumn. I stood in front of my closet longer than necessary, fingertips brushing over fabrics like they might whisper advice. Part of me wanted to dress down, to prove I didn't care. Another part wanted armor. In the end, I chose something simple and deliberate: a soft cream blouse, tailored trousers, and the navy heels I had worn to La Maribel, not as a statement, as a reminder. Daniel watched me from the doorway. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. I gave him a small smile. "I'm not dressing for her." "I know." But we both knew it wasn't entirely true. Lorraine's house sat on a manicured corner lot, immaculate hedges framing a facade that always felt more museum than home. Every time we pulled into that driveway, I felt like I was entering a performance space, roles assigned, lines rehearsed. Daniel parked, and for a moment neither of us moved. "If she says anything," he began. "I don't need you to rescue me," I said gently. "I need you to stand beside me." He nodded. "I will." Inside, the scent of rosemary and roasted chicken drifted through the air. Lorraine was in the kitchen, moving with precise efficiency. She wore a pale lavender dress and pearls, as if hosting a luncheon for diplomats rather than her own son and daughter-in-law. "Daniel," she said warmly, kissing his cheek, "you look well." Her eyes shifted to me. "Emily." No kiss, no warmth, but no sharpness either. "Lorraine," I replied evenly. We took our seats at the dining table. This table had seen years of subtle battles, small corrections, gentle humiliations, polite dismissals disguised as advice. Today something felt different. Lorraine poured wine carefully, filling Daniel's glass first, then mine. A small shift in order, perhaps insignificant to anyone else, not to me. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries. Daniel spoke about work, though he avoided boasting. I listened, contributed when appropriate. Lorraine asked measured questions, less about status, more about logistics. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down deliberately. "I've been thinking," she said. Daniel stiffened slightly beside me. "About the other night." I waited. I may have underestimated how the seating arrangement would be perceived. Perceived. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer to accountability than I had ever heard from her. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied calmly. She looked at me directly then, really looked at me. "You have connections I wasn't aware of." There it was. Not concern for my feelings, concern for miscalculation. "I have relationships built over time." She nodded slowly. "Victor holds you in high regard." "We volunteered together. He's generous with his time." She studied me a moment longer. I could almost see her recalibrating the image she'd built of me all these years, the small-town girl, the outsider, the accessory to her son's success. "I suppose," she said carefully, "I've always wanted the best for Daniel." "I know," I answered. "And sometimes," she continued, "that has meant prioritizing certain impressions." Daniel spoke up then, his voice steady. "Mom, I don't need to be separated from my wife to impress anyone." Lorraine's gaze flickered to him, then back to me. "I see that," she said quietly. The admission hung in the air. We finished dinner without further confrontation. Conversation drifted toward family stories, holidays, distant relatives. The tension didn't vanish, but it softened, less like a blade, more like a scar. After dessert, Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call. Lorraine and I found ourselves alone at the table, plates cleared, candles burning low. She folded her hands carefully. "You surprised me," she said. "In what way?" You didn't argue. You didn't create a scene. You simply adjusted the power. Her phrasing was clinical, but not unkind. I didn't want power. I wanted inclusion. She considered that. I grew up believing that status protects you, she said after a long pause. If you're at the right table with the right people, you're safe. And if you're not? I asked softly. You learn to survive. For the first time, I glimpsed something vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. Not weakness, history. I didn't grow up with status. I grew up with community. When someone was left out, you pulled up another chair. She looked down at the tablecloth, smoothing an invisible crease. I may not change overnight, she said. I'm not asking you to, I replied. Another silence, but this one wasn't sharp. When Daniel returned, Lorraine stood and cleared the remaining dishes herself, another small deviation from her usual delegation to staff. As we gathered our things to leave, she paused at the door. Emily, she said. I turned. Next month, I'm hosting a charity gala. I would like you to help me plan it. The invitation caught me off guard. Help you? I repeated. You have experience with community programs and apparently strong connections. There was pride in her voice still, but also something else, respect or at least acknowledgement of value. I'd be willing, I said slowly, if we plan it together. Her lips curved slightly. Together. It wasn't reconciliation, it wasn't warmth, but it was partnership, tentative and fragile. In the car on the way home, Daniel exhaled deeply. That went better than I expected. Yes, I agreed. He glanced at me. Are you okay? I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. I think, I said carefully, this was never just about your mother. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I let myself believe I needed her approval to belong, but I don't. He reached for my hand again. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. And this time when he said it, it felt aligned, not performative, not reactive, just true. But growth is rarely linear. Just because Lorraine had extended an olive branch didn't mean she wouldn't test boundaries again, and just because Daniel had stood beside me once didn't mean old habits wouldn't try to resurface. Still, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't standing outside any doors anymore, and if one closed, I now knew exactly how to open it. The weeks leading up to the charity gala unfolded in a way I hadn't expected. Lorraine didn't hover or micromanage, at least not in the obvious ways. Instead, she scheduled structured planning meetings, sent neatly formatted emails, and asked for my input on themes, guest lists, and beneficiary organizations. At first, I thought it was strategic, a way to monitor me. But as the days passed, something subtle began to shift. She listened. Not always easily, not without the occasional pursed lip or raised brow, but she listened. We met at her house every Tuesday afternoon. The first meeting was stiff. She had already drafted a concept, black tie, silent auction, elite guest list drawn heavily from Daniel's professional circle. It must reflect prestige, she said, tapping her manicured nail against the proposal folder. Prestige is good, I replied carefully, but impact is better. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. If this is truly about charity, I continued, the people we're helping should be visible in the room, not just spoken about in speeches. She leaned back slightly. You're suggesting what? A hybrid guest list, I said. Business leaders, yes, but also representatives from the programs we're funding, teachers, volunteers, maybe even a few scholarship recipients. She hesitated. I could see the conflict in her, control versus evolution. That could complicate seating, she murmured. I almost smiled at the irony. It could expand perspective, I answered. The silence stretched, but this time it wasn't adversarial. It was contemplative. Draft me a revised proposal, she said at last. And just like that, the dynamic shifted another inch. Over the next few meetings, we debated venue decor, catering options, and keynote speakers. There were moments of friction. She preferred ornate centerpieces. I suggested understated elegance. She favored a formal auctioneer. I proposed a short video highlighting real stories from the literacy program. To my surprise, she agreed to the video. Emotion can be persuasive, she admitted. Emotion is human, I replied. Daniel watched all of this with quiet fascination. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner at home, he leaned against the counter and said, "I don't think I've ever seen my mother collaborate like this." "I don't think she's ever had to," I said. "Do you trust her?" he asked. The question lingered. "I trust the progress," I answered honestly, "not perfection." He nodded slowly. There were still moments when old patterns tried to creep back in. One afternoon, Lorraine casually suggested that I handle community-facing tasks while she managed executive relations. I met her gaze evenly. "We'll both handle both." She paused, then inclined her head. "Of course." It was a small victory, but small victories add up. The gala arrived faster than either of us expected. The venue was a restored historic hall downtown, vaulted ceilings, warm lighting, elegant but not ostentatious. The guest list reflected our compromise: corporate leaders mingling with educators, philanthropists standing beside volunteers. The energy felt different, less performative, more purposeful. Lorraine stood near the entrance greeting guests. She wore deep sapphire that evening, commanding but refined. When I approached, she gave me a measured nod. "You've done well," she said quietly. "So have you," I replied. It wasn't flattery, it was acknowledgement. Daniel moved through the room confidently, introducing people across social circles. I watched as he connected his CFO with a school principal, as he listened attentively to a young scholarship recipient describe her dreams. He looked proud, but not just of himself. Halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed for the video presentation. The screen illuminated with images of children reading, volunteers tutoring, community centers buzzing with life. Soft music played beneath interviews, real voices telling real stories. When the video ended, there wasn't immediate applause. There was silence, the kind of silence that means people are thinking. Then the applause came, steady, sincere. Lorraine stepped up to the podium for her speech. She glanced at me briefly before beginning. "Tonight," she said, her voice clear and composed, "is about more than generosity. It's about understanding that success means very little if it's not shared." The words echoed something I had said weeks earlier at La Mirabelle. She continued, "I want to thank my daughter-in-law, Emily, for reminding me that inclusion is not a logistical detail. It is the foundation of community." A ripple moved through the room. Heads turned toward me. I hadn't expected that. Heat rose to my cheeks, but I held her gaze and nodded. For Lorraine, public acknowledgement was not casual, it was deliberate. The rest of the evening unfolded beautifully. Donations exceeded expectations. Conversations felt authentic. When the final numbers were tallied, the total surpassed even Lorraine's ambitious projections. Backstage, away from the crowd, she allowed herself a rare, unguarded smile. "You were right about the hybrid guest list," she admitted. "We were right," I corrected gently. She studied me for a long moment. I spent years believing control was strength, but perhaps adaptability is. I didn't respond immediately. I let the moment settle. "It takes courage to change," I said. Her eyes softened, not dramatically, not sentimentally, but enough. "Daniel chose well," she said finally. That, from her, was monumental. Later that night, as guests departed and staff cleared tables, Daniel wrapped an arm around my waist. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Of us," I said. He smiled. "Of us." Driving home, I reflected on the journey from that small table outside the private room to this night. It hadn't been about revenge. It hadn't been about winning. It had been about refusing to disappear. Respect, I had learned, isn't demanded loudly. It's established quietly, through boundaries, through presence, through consistency. Lorraine hadn't transformed into a different person. She was still polished, still strategic, but she was no longer trying to erase me, and I was no longer trying to earn my place by shrinking. As we pulled into our driveway, Daniel turned off the engine and looked at me thoughtfully. You know, that night at the restaurant changed more than I realized. It changed me, too, I admitted. He reached for my hand. If I ever make you feel like you're outside the room again, you won't, I said gently, because now we both know what that feels like. He nodded. Inside our home, the quiet felt peaceful, not tense, balanced. But growth invites new tests, success brings new pressures, and families, no matter how evolved, carry echoes of old habits. I didn't know then that another challenge was already forming, one that would test not just Lorraine's progress, but Daniel's loyalty in ways we hadn't yet faced. Success has a way of amplifying everything. Strengths become more visible, so do cracks. In the months after the gala, Daniel's career accelerated quickly. His promotion led to new responsibilities, new travel schedules, new expectations. He was invited to exclusive conferences, private strategy dinners, and networking retreats that stretched across weekends. At first, it felt exciting. We celebrated each new milestone together. We toasted in our kitchen with inexpensive wine and laughed about how different our lives looked compared to when we first married. But slowly, the rhythm began to change. Just one more dinner, he would say. It's important for visibility. Just one more weekend away, he'd explain. The board wants alignment. I told myself it was temporary, that this was the cost of ambition, that partnership meant flexibility. Then one evening, he came home unusually quiet. "What is it?" I asked, setting aside the book I'd been pretending to read. He loosened his tie and sat across from me at the dining table. "The company is considering expanding into international markets." "That's amazing," I said honestly. "It would require relocating, at least part-time, possibly London." The word landed heavily. "Relocating?" I repeated. "For a year, maybe 2. "And this is decided?" "Not yet. They're evaluating candidates." I studied him carefully. "You want it." He didn't deny it. "It's a huge opportunity, Em. Global exposure, executive track." "And what about us?" I asked quietly. "We'd figure it out," he said quickly. "You could come with me." "What about the community programs, the literacy initiative, the relationships I've built here?" He hesitated. "We'd rebuild," he said. Rebuild. I thought about how long it had taken me to establish myself, to be seen not just as Daniel's wife, but as someone with value in my own right. "I'm not furniture," I said softly. "I can't just be relocated for aesthetic symmetry." "That's not what I meant," he replied, frustration creeping into his tone. "I know," I said, "but it's how it feels." We didn't resolve it that night. A week later, Lorraine invited us for tea, an unusual midweek request. She served delicate pastries and poured chamomile with careful precision. "I hear there's talk of London," she said casually. Daniel blinked. "Who told you?" "News travels," she replied. I watched her closely. "It would be extraordinary for your career," she continued, turning to Daniel. "International leadership experience at your age is rare." "And Emily?" Daniel asked. Lorraine's gaze shifted to me. "You are adaptable," she said. "You've proven that." Adaptable. There was admiration in her voice, but also assumption. "I'm capable," I said evenly, "but capability doesn't mean obligation." She tilted her head slightly. Surely you understand the significance of this opportunity. I do, but I also understand the significance of partnership. Daniel shifted uncomfortably between us. Lorraine sipped her tea. When Daniel's father was offered a similar advancement, I supported him without hesitation. And were you happy? I asked gently. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Happiness, she said after a pause, is often secondary to stability. Is it? I asked quietly. A silence fell over the table. For the first time, I sensed something deeper beneath her advocacy for Daniel's move. Not just ambition, history. Later that evening, Daniel and I drove home in contemplative quiet. She thinks I should take it, he said. I know. And you don't? It's not that simple, I replied. I don't want to hold you back, but I also don't want to disappear into your shadow again. He looked at me sharply. You wouldn't disappear. Would I? I asked softly. He didn't answer. Over the next few days, tension threaded through our conversations. We weren't fighting, but we were orbiting different priorities. Then one afternoon, I received an email from Victor. The Literacy Foundation had been selected for a major citywide grant. They wanted me to lead the expansion initiative, new centers, new partnerships, broader outreach. It was everything I had worked toward. I stared at the screen for a long time. That evening, I told Daniel. That's incredible, he said, genuine pride in his voice. It's also here, I replied. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd once celebrated his promotion. It seems like we're both being asked to choose, I said quietly. He ran a hand through his hair. Why does it have to be one or the other? Because London isn't a commute, I said gently. Days passed without resolution. Then the company made its announcement. Daniel was officially offered the London position. Celebration emails flooded his inbox. Colleagues congratulated him enthusiastically. Lorraine called within minutes. This is the moment we've prepared for, she said proudly. We went to her house that night. She had already opened champagne. To new horizons, she toasted. Daniel clinked glasses with her, but his eyes sought mine. After the toast, she turned to me. You must be thrilled. I held her gaze steadily. I'm proud of him, I said. But, she pressed, but I've been offered an expansion role here. Her expression flickered. Oh, she said carefully. It's significant, Daniel added. Citywide funding. Lorraine processed this quietly. So you're both advancing, she said slowly. Yes, I replied, but not in the same direction. There it was, the unspoken tension finally spoken. Lorraine set her glass down deliberately. When Daniel's father was promoted, I set aside my own plans. And did you ever resent that? I asked gently. Her lips pressed thin. That isn't the point. Maybe it is, I said gently. Daniel looked between us. I don't want either of you sacrificing silently, he said. I don't want to repeat old patterns. Lorraine's eyes softened slightly. Success tests marriage, she said quietly, more than struggle ever does. That truth settled heavily in the room. We left shortly after, champagne unfinished. At home, Daniel stood by the window for a long time. I don't want to choose between my career and you, I replied. I'm not asking you to. Then what are we doing? I walked to him and took his hand. We're deciding what success actually means. And for the first time since La Mirabelle, I realized this wasn't just about Lorraine's evolution. It was about ours. The week after Daniel received the official London offer felt suspended in time. Every conversation carried weight. Every silence carried more. Friends congratulated him. Colleagues assumed we were packing. Even our neighbors stopped by with casual comments like, "You must be so excited for the adventure." Adventure. It sounded romantic, expansive, brave, but I knew what it could also be: isolating, disorienting, a slow erosion of the identity I had just fought so hard to establish. Daniel and I tried to approach the decision logically. We made lists, pros and cons, timelines, financial projections. We discussed temporary arrangements, him going ahead alone, me joining later, alternating months. Every option felt like a compromise. One evening, after hours of circling the same arguments, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said something that stopped me cold. "What if I don't take it?" The room went quiet. "You'd give it up?" I asked softly. He shrugged, but there was tension in it. "Maybe the cost is too high." "Or maybe," I said tearfully, "the cost is different than we imagined." He looked at me confused. "I don't want you to resent me. 10 years from now, 20. I don't want you wondering what might have been. And I don't want you to feel like you abandon your purpose," he shot back. We weren't arguing, not really. We were protecting each other from hypothetical regret. That weekend, Lorraine invited me to lunch. Just me. I almost declined, but something in her voice, less polished, more deliberate, made me accept. We met at a quiet cafe near her house, not La Mirabelle, not anywhere performative. She was already seated when I arrived, hands folded neatly on the table. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I was curious," I replied honestly. She gave a faint smile. "About what?" "About what you wanted to say without Daniel present." She didn't deny it. After the waitress took our orders, she looked at me steadily. "When I was Daniel's age, I had a small design business. Nothing grand, but it was mine." I blinked, surprised. She had never mentioned this before. "I closed it when his father's promotion required us to move overseas. It seemed obvious. His opportunity was larger, more stable." "And you never reopened it?" I asked slowly. She shook her head slightly. Life filled in around the space. There was no visible bitterness in her tone, but there was something else, a quiet echo. "Do you regret it?" I asked gently. She took a long breath. "Regret is complicated," she said. "I gained many things: security, influence, position, but sometimes I wonder who I might have become." The vulnerability in her admission startled me. "I don't want Daniel to give up London," she said firmly, "but I also don't want you to give up yourself." I studied her carefully. "That's new," I said softly. She didn't argue. "You misjudged me," she continued, "for years. I saw you as an accessory to Daniel's life. I didn't understand that you were building something independent." I felt the weight of those words. "And now?" I asked. "Now I see that if he moves without you, he risks becoming the kind of man who leaves people outside doors." The phrase hung between us. "You raised him," I said gently. "Yes, and I am still learning from him." We sat in reflective silence for a moment. "Whatever you decide," she added, "make sure it is mutual, not sacrificial." When I left the cafe, I felt something unexpected. Not tension, not rivalry, solidarity. That evening, I told Daniel about the lunch. "She said that?" he asked, astonished. "She did." He shook his head slowly. "I don't think I've ever heard her talk about regret." "People change," I replied. "Because of you," he replied. "Because of circumstances," I corrected. The following week, Daniel requested a meeting with his executive team. He asked about flexibility, remote oversight, a modified travel schedule. The response surprised us both. They were willing to negotiate. The London role didn't have to mean permanent relocation. It could mean quarterly travel, strategic oversight from the U.S., and a gradual transition rather than an abrupt move. It wasn't the original offer, but it was a bridge. When Daniel told me, his eyes were hopeful. "It won't be easy," he said. "There will be travel, long weeks, but we won't have to uproot everything." "And my expansion project?" I asked. "You can lead it," he said firmly. "We can both grow." For the first time in weeks, I felt air return to the room. We went to Lorraine's house that Sunday with the decision. Daniel explained the modified arrangement. Lorraine listened carefully, hands folded. "So you've negotiated terms," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And you're staying," she confirmed. "For now," he said. "Together." She nodded slowly. "Compromise. Perhaps that is the true mark of leadership." Dinner that night felt lighter, not because everything was solved perfectly, but because we had chosen deliberately. After dessert, Lorraine walked me to the door. "I am proud of you," she said quietly. The words were simple, but from her they carried history. "Thank you," I replied. "And," she added after a brief pause, "I am proud of myself." I smiled at that. Driving home, Daniel reached for my hand. "We didn't lose anything," he said. "No," I answered. "We redefined it." Success, I was learning, isn't about sitting at the most exclusive table. It's about ensuring no one you love is left outside. And sometimes it's about realizing the door was never locked. You just needed the courage to open it. The months that followed brought a rhythm I hadn't expected. Daniel's London role became a part of our lives, but not the entirety of them. He traveled frequently, yes, but we negotiated evenings together, weekends home, and clear boundaries for the work that could be done remotely. Our partnership felt stronger, more deliberate, less about convenience and more about choice. The literacy expansion program had taken off in ways I had only dreamed of. New centers opened, more volunteers joined, and the children's programs began receiving recognition from the city council. Every time I visited a center, seeing the kids' faces light up as they read or learned, I felt that deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your efforts mattered. Lorraine noticed. She started attending some of the events, offering help in ways that were carefully measured but meaningful. She introduced donors, helped organize small fundraising luncheons, and even stayed late to assist with paperwork when the team was behind schedule. There were moments, rare, fleeting, but undeniable, where I saw the pride in her eyes directed toward me. It wasn't permission, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. One evening, after a particularly long day of opening a new center, I returned home to find Daniel pacing the kitchen, phone in hand. "You're back early," I said, dropping my bag. He looked up, exhaustion etched into his features. "I cut my trip short. There's been an issue in London." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of issue?" "It's not dangerous," he said quickly, "but there's been some internal conflict, miscommunications among the executives. They've requested I step in immediately to mediate." I nodded slowly, trying not to let my anxiety show. "So you're leaving tomorrow?" He sighed. "Yes, for at least a week." I reached out and took his hand. "You'll handle it. You always do." "I hope so," he murmured. "But I hate leaving you with so much on your plate." "You're not leaving me," I reminded him gently. "I'm handling my work. You do yours. We're a team, remember?" He nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. It wasn't just work. It was the pressure of living up to expectations, of not letting anyone down, of balancing career, family, and personal growth. The first week of Daniel's absence passed with long phone calls, video check-ins, and careful management of both his work and my programs. But it was the second week that brought the test I hadn't anticipated. I received a call from Lorraine late one evening. "Emily," she said, voice calm but firm, "I need your advice on a matter involving Daniel's business partners." My heart skipped. She hadn't called me like this before, not for strategy, not for guidance. "Of course," I replied cautiously. She explained a delicate negotiation, one that could impact Daniel's expansion plans. She had already drafted a response but wanted my input. I listened carefully, weighing my words. "You could propose a phased approach, one that mitigates risk while maintaining leverage, that allows Daniel flexibility without committing prematurely." There was a pause on the line. Then, "That's remarkably astute," she admitted. I didn't respond immediately. "It's about seeing the bigger picture," I said softly. Lorraine didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. She simply nodded audibly. "You've grown," she said finally, "more than I realized." That night, after the call, I sat quietly in our living room. Daniel was still in London, Lorraine had returned to her routines, and yet I felt a strange sense of peace. Not victory, not triumph, not even reconciliation in the traditional sense, but equilibrium. I realized that standing up for yourself isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's strategic, and sometimes it's measured patience. Over the next few months, our family rhythm evolved. Lorraine became more collaborative, Daniel became more attuned to our partnership, and I began to see that influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the ability to be consistently present, to offer perspective, to refuse to be sidelined. One afternoon, I visited a newly opened literacy center. Children crowded around tables, laughing as they traced letters. Volunteers moved efficiently, helping where needed. I watched a little boy struggle with a word and then triumph as he finally pronounced it correctly. And I felt that deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your efforts mattered. When Daniel returned from London that week, he walked through the door with a rare ease. "How was your week?" he asked. "Intense, but good." He smiled. "You continue to amaze me. I don't know what I would do without you." I leaned against him, thinking back to that night at La Marabelle, to the moment when Victor had stepped out and opened that door, to the small table where I had first been made to feel invisible. I realized then that life's tests rarely come in isolation. They come layered, interconnected, and the measure of partnership is not only surviving those tests, but learning from them together. Later that evening, Lorraine called. "I heard about the literacy center opening. You handled it impeccably." "Thank you," I said. "You've earned my respect," she continued, "not because I grant it, but because you've shown it's yours." Her words were deliberate. They weren't warmth, they weren't affection, but they were acknowledgement, recognition, validation. And sometimes that is enough. That night, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights, Daniel asleep beside me. I reflected on how far we had come, not just in our marriage, or in our family dynamics, or in our careers, but in understanding the value of presence, respect, and mutual recognition. Lorraine hadn't changed completely, Daniel hadn't given up ambition, and I hadn't sought revenge. We had learned to navigate the complexities of human relationships with clarity and grace. And I knew that no matter what doors might close in the future or which tables might try to exclude us, we would always find a way to open them or pull a chair up ourselves. Because dignity, respect, and partnership aren't gifts, they're choices. And we chose them every day. The following months were a delicate balancing act. Daniel's role in London required longer stretches away from home than either of us had initially anticipated, yet the arrangement we had negotiated, quarterly travel with remote oversight, allowed us to maintain our lives here. I could manage the literacy center's expansion, and he could attend to the international assignments. On paper, it was perfect. In reality, it demanded constant communication. patience, and subtle adjustments in our daily routines. I quickly discovered that distance magnifies everything. Small misunderstandings become louder, anxieties echo, and old insecurities surface unexpectedly. One morning, a week into Daniel's trip, I received a text from him, curt and out of character. Need to talk tonight. Urgent. My stomach clenched. I tried to remind myself that we had navigated challenges before, but the unknown always feels heavier than the familiar. That evening, we connected over a video call. He looked tense, running a hand through his hair. "There's a complication with the London partners," he said, exhaling sharply. "They want me there sooner than planned, and it could require an overnight stay midweek." I studied him. "You mean you might be away longer?" "Yes, and they're hinting that missing the initial meetings could jeopardize future opportunities." I nodded slowly, weighing my words carefully. "I understand, but you need to remember what we agreed. Partnership, boundaries. Your career is important, yes, but so is presence. Our presence, here, together." He hesitated, and I realized then how easy it could have been for us to slip back into old patterns, the silent compromises, the unspoken resentment, the assumption that someone had to give way. "I know," he said finally. "It's just, I don't want to lose the momentum." "Then don't," I replied. "But don't lose us either." There was a pause. The quiet hum of the city outside his temporary London flat punctuated the space between us. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much my absence would affect you." "It's not just me," I said. "It's the family, the life we've built here. It's about maintaining what we've fought for. You've learned the importance of presence, Daniel. Don't forget it now." He nodded. "You're right. I don't want to make the same mistakes. I promise." That night, after the call ended, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Distance could test us, yes, but it could also clarify priorities. I understood now that partnership wasn't just about being physically together, it was about consistently choosing each other, even when circumstances made it inconvenient. Meanwhile, Lorraine's involvement with the literacy programs grew quietly but steadily. She would attend strategic meetings, offer her advice on funding proposals, and occasionally lend her connections to secure private donors. Her presence was no longer about control, it was about contribution. One afternoon, she invited me to her home to review the upcoming gala budget and guest list. I arrived to find her in casual attire, sleeves rolled up, with a stack of spreadsheets and handwritten notes. The polished exterior I was used to was gone, replaced by focused determination. "Emily," she began, glancing up from her notes, "I want your perspective on the sponsorship allocations. I know you've been managing the community outreach. I want this to reflect the actual impact, not just the numbers." I felt a small swell of satisfaction, not pride over being correct, but acknowledgement of my role. "Absolutely," I said. "The numbers are important, but the stories matter more. The donors need to see the faces and hear the voices of those they're helping." She nodded, absorbing my words carefully. "You've been a stabilizing force," she said. "I see that now." For a moment, I allowed myself to simply notice the change in her tone. No sharp edges, no veiled critique, just recognition. Later that week, Daniel returned from London. The first night back, we went for a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. The table was set simply, candles lit, the city lights outside casting gentle reflections across the window. "I missed this," he said softly, reaching for my hand across the table. "I did too," I replied. "Even in the chaos, it's the quiet moments that matter most." He nodded. "I feel like we've learned a lot over the past months, about each other, about boundaries, about respect." "Yes," I said, "and about partnership, about standing together not just in triumph, but in navigating obstacles." He smiled, a small but genuine curve of his lips. "I don't take that for granted anymore. I won't." In the days that followed, the preparations for the gala intensified. Volunteers coordinated schedules, caterers finalized menus, and donors confirmed attendance. Lorraine and I worked closely, reviewing guest accommodations and seating arrangements. There were moments of friction, differences in vision, approaches, and style, but each time we addressed them openly, without the subtle power plays that had marked our past interactions. One afternoon, while reviewing the final seating chart, Lorraine looked up from her notes. "Emily," she said, "I've been thinking, the way you've handled these events, the expansion programs, even your presence in the family, it's remarkable. I underestimated you before. I see that now." I paused, absorbing the weight of her words. "Thank you," I said softly, "but it's not about being remarkable. It's about not being invisible." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed." The gala arrived on a crisp evening with golden lighting casting warm shadows across the hall. Guests arrived in elegant attire, the buzz of conversation filling the space. The mix of corporate leaders, educators, volunteers, and community representatives created an energy that was both sophisticated and humane, precisely what we had envisioned. Lorraine greeted guests with poise, introducing me as her partner in planning. It felt surreal. The same woman who had once excluded me from a simple dinner, now standing beside me as a collaborator in a large-scale event. Daniel was present, but unobtrusive, moving through the crowd, connecting with attendees, and checking on logistics. He caught my eye frequently, and each time a small smile passed between us, a silent acknowledgement that we were navigating these challenges together as a team. When the evening began, the opening video played, a montage of smiling children, volunteers in action, and community programs thriving. The audience was captivated, and when the video ended, applause filled the room. Lorraine stepped to the podium, delivering a speech that acknowledged the importance of inclusion, collaboration, and impact. "And I want to acknowledge Emily," she said, her voice steady. "Her vision, her dedication, and her insistence on being seen and heard have made this event possible. She's reminded me that true leadership is not about control, but about partnership." I felt a mix of surprise and gratitude. The recognition was not for revenge, nor for one-upsmanship. It was validation of the long journey, of the battles fought quietly, of the respect earned and shared. Daniel approached me after her speech, wrapping an arm around my waist. "You did this," he whispered. "Not just tonight, but every day." I smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of solidarity. "We did this," I corrected. And as I looked around the room, at the families, the volunteers, the supporters, I understood something fundamental. Influence, respect, and dignity are not given. They are cultivated through patience, persistence, and presence. The gala ended with record donations, new volunteer sign-ups, and the sense of community strengthened beyond what I had imagined. Lorraine approached me one last time that night, offering a rare, genuine smile. "Emily," she said quietly, "I see you, and I respect you truly." For years, I had waited for approval, for acknowledgement, for validation from her. That night, I realized it was never about her approval alone. It was about standing firm, refusing to be invisible, and demanding mutual respect. As Daniel and I drove home later, the city lights reflecting on the windshield, I felt a calm certainty. Challenges would come, family, career, distance, ambition, but we had learned to navigate them together, to insist on dignity and partnership, and to recognize that no door could remain closed when we refused to step back. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely seen. The weeks after the gala were a strange mix of relief and recalibration. The initial adrenaline of the event had faded, leaving space for reflection. Daniel's London trips continued, but we had found a rhythm that worked. Scheduled check-ins, clear boundaries, and shared accountability. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One morning, as I was reviewing proposals for a new literacy center, my phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Lorraine. Emily, could we meet? I'd like your input on a personal matter. Curious and cautious, I agreed. We met at a small, quiet cafe. No staff hovering, no formalities, just the two of us seated across from each other with steaming cups of coffee. Lorraine studied me quietly before speaking. I've been thinking a lot about my approach, she said finally. The way I've interacted with you, with Daniel, with my family. I waited. She rarely offered reflections like this without a purpose. I realized, she continued slowly, that control was never the same as care. I confused influence with guidance, and in doing so, I overlooked important voices, including yours. I felt a pang of emotion but kept my voice calm. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might realize. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. I want to do better, not just for Daniel, not just for appearances, but for myself. I want to learn to trust that my family is capable, that my daughter-in-law, my son, my team, they all bring value, and that I don't need to dominate to ensure things go well. Her honesty startled me, not because I doubted her words, but because it carried vulnerability, a softness I hadn't seen in years. I've learned a lot from you, I admitted. Patience, persistence, standing firm without being confrontational. You've had to adjust, yes, but I've had to navigate my own fears of being invisible, of being dismissed, and now it seems we've both evolved. Lorraine smiled faintly. Perhaps, and perhaps there's more to learn. It struck me that family dynamics are rarely linear. Growth happens in fits and starts. Sometimes it's dramatic, sometimes invisible, but it always leaves traces if you pay attention. Daniel returned from London that evening. We spent a quiet night at home, sharing updates about our respective challenges. He was tired but energized. His work was demanding, but the satisfaction of seeing the programs flourish kept him grounded. I realized that we had created a balance. Neither of us sacrificed our purpose for the other, yet we supported each other fully. A week later, a new challenge appeared. One of the major donors for the literacy program had a scheduling conflict and threatened to withdraw support unless I attended an event they were hosting. The date coincided with Daniel's critical London meetings. I called him immediately. I can handle this, I said. You focus on your commitments, but I need your trust. He hesitated, then nodded. I trust you. I know you'll handle it. The evening of the donor event, I arrived at a grand hall, buzzing with influential figures, local politicians, and educators. I was calm, prepared, and determined not just to maintain the program's funding, but to showcase the integrity and impact of our work. Lorraine appeared shortly after, stepping past the reception with her usual poise. But this time she walked directly toward me and offered her hand. Emily, lead the evening. I trust your judgment completely. I felt the warmth of genuine respect. This was not about control, not about appearances. It was acknowledgement, partnership, acknowledgement earned, not demanded. Throughout the night, I presented our programs with confidence. I introduced volunteers, shared success stories, and navigated the event with ease. Every conversation, every handshake, every smile reinforced the sense of agency I had fought so hard to maintain. Lorraine remained nearby, offering subtle guidance but never interference. Later, after the donors expressed their support and the evening concluded successfully, Lorraine pulled me aside. You've exceeded my expectations. Not that you ever needed them, but still, I see now that your value isn't secondary to Daniel's. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and validation. Thank you, Lorraine. That means a lot. She studied me for a moment. It also reminds me, sometimes I need to step back to truly see people, even those I've misjudged, including myself. Her words lingered with me as I left the hall. I realized that recognition, true recognition, is a rare gift, especially from someone who has spent years wielding authority as a shield. Back at home, Daniel greeted me with a warm hug. "How did it go?" he asked, his eyes bright. "Better than expected," I said, settling into the comfort of our shared space. He looked at me with quiet admiration. "I'm proud of you, always have been, and I see now that our partnership is stronger than any distance or obstacle." I smiled, leaning against him. "And I'm proud of us." That night, as I reflected on the journey from being excluded at La Mirabelle to standing confidently alongside Lorraine, to balancing career, family, and ambition, I understood something profound. Respect and inclusion aren't given freely. They are cultivated, negotiated, and sometimes demanded quietly through presence and integrity. Lorraine's evolution wasn't complete. She still carried her sharp instincts, her strategic mind, her desire for influence, but she had learned that strength is not diminished by sharing space, nor is authority lost when acknowledgement is granted. Daniel and I had also evolved. We had learned that partnership is not just about coexisting, it's about mutual support, active listening, and shared decision-making. It's about seeing each other fully and refusing to let circumstance or ambition erase identity or agency. And I realized as I stood by the window looking out at the city lights that life would continue to test us. New challenges, unforeseen obstacles, and moments of doubt would come. But we were prepared because we had learned that standing together, claiming our space, and insisting on respect is not a single act. It's a continuous practice. That night, I went to bed with a quiet certainty. We were no longer navigating fear, exclusion, or invisible boundaries. We were shaping a family, a partnership, and a life built on intentional choices. The door that had once been closed to me was now open, not because anyone had granted permission, but because I had refused to remain outside. And with Daniel by my side and a newfound understanding with Lorraine, I knew that we could face any challenge, any distance, any misunderstanding, and still emerge stronger. Because the real lesson wasn't about La Mirabelle or a luxury dinner or even a single act of acknowledgement. It was about courage. The courage to stand firm, the courage to demand inclusion, the courage to define your worth. And once you claim that courage, once you assert it with grace and determination, no door, no table, no person can make you feel invisible again. The months that followed were, in many ways, the most quietly profound of my life. Daniel continued to travel, but the rhythm we had established held strong. The literacy program flourished beyond what I had imagined. Centers opened across the city, volunteers signed on in greater numbers, and the children, those little faces lighting up with new words and new possibilities, reminded me every day why I had fought so hard to be seen. Lorraine's presence in our lives had shifted too. She no longer attempted to control or dominate. Instead, she offered guidance when needed, quietly celebrated achievements, and even asked for my opinion on matters I never thought I'd be consulted about. She had become a partner in subtle ways, not because I demanded it, but because she had learned to recognize my value. One afternoon, Daniel called from London unexpectedly. "Emily," he said, voice tinged with excitement, "there's an opportunity to expand our program internationally. They want me to be the point of contact for education initiatives in London itself." I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with clarity. "And what do you want?" I asked, gently. "To go," he admitted, "but I don't want to leave everything here without a foundation you can manage. I want it to feel stable. I want us both to grow without losing each other." "Then we'll make it work," I said quietly. "We've done it before." He laughed softly. We've done more than survive, Emily. We've built something rare. It struck me then how far we had come, from that night at La Mirabelle when I had been excluded, from the tension-filled dinners, the quiet frustrations, the microaggressions that once defined my interactions with Lorraine. Each moment of challenge had led to this understanding that inclusion, respect, and recognition aren't gifts, they are earned, cultivated, and claimed with grace. The real test came the following week when Lorraine invited us for dinner again. But this time, there was no pretense. The table was warm, family style, not rigid or overly polished. No special seating arrangements, no whispered rules, just food, conversation, and presence. As we ate, Lorraine spoke of her past, the sacrifices she had made, the assumptions she had carried, and the mistakes she had repeated over the years. She said, "I see now that true care isn't measured by control, it's measured by respect, by seeing people fully and letting them grow without overshadowing them." I listened, feeling a gentle calm wash over me. She was admitting her limitations, not to diminish herself, but to acknowledge growth. It was a rare humility, one that came only from experience, reflection, and courage. Daniel reached for my hand across the table. "We've come a long way," he said softly. "Yes," I agreed, "and there will still be tests, still challenges, but we know now that our choices define the outcomes more than anyone else's actions." The dinner ended with laughter, real, unforced, free from tension. And as I left Lorraine's house that night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't anticipated. Not closure in the sense of erasing the past, but in claiming my space in the present. I had been excluded once, but I had also learned how to assert myself, to build authority without arrogance, to demand respect without resentment. The next morning, I visited one of the new literacy centers. Children crowded the reading room, giggling as they took turns pronouncing new words. Volunteers guided them gently, sharing their time and energy freely. I paused at the doorway, watching the scene, and realized how far we had come, not just Daniel and me, but the entire ecosystem we had helped nurture. I thought of Lorraine and the lessons she had taught me indirectly, that people are capable of growth if given the chance, that control is often mistaken for care, and that acknowledgement is a rare and powerful gift. I thought of Daniel and the lessons he had taught me, that love is not static, that partnership requires constant vigilance, but also trust. And I thought of myself and the lessons I had finally internalized, that visibility, voice, and agency are rights worth defending, and that refusing to be erased is a quiet form of courage that leaves a lasting impact. Weeks later, as Daniel prepared for another London trip, he pulled me aside in our kitchen. He said, "I've been thinking, we've built a life here that can't just be paused for opportunity. We've proven we can navigate distance, challenges, and ambition, but now we can take the next step." I looked at him, curious. "Which is?" "To partner internationally," he said slowly, "not just in work, but in building programs that span borders. I don't want you to feel like leaving your home or your mission, but I want us both to grow without sacrificing what matters." I thought of the years of compromise, the moments of invisibility, the doors that had been slammed, and the ones I had opened myself. "We can do it," I said, "as long as we do it together." He laughed softly. "Together," he agreed. Later that evening, Lorraine called. "I've been watching from afar, and I have to admit, I underestimated you both. Not just your determination, but your ability to maintain balance while expanding influence. I am proud." Her acknowledgement didn't come with conditions, lectures, or expectations. It was simply recognition. And that, I realized, was worth more than any luxury dinner, any exclusive table, any social validation. As I hung up, I felt a sense of completeness. The chapter that began with exclusion had ended not with revenge, nor resentment, nor defeat, but with clarity, respect, and shared accomplishment. We had navigated ambition, family dynamics, and ego, and had emerged intact, stronger, wiser, and more aligned than ever. I sat by the window that night, Daniel's hand in mine, city lights stretching endlessly in the distance. I reflected on the journey, the closed doors, the whispered dismissals, the moments of doubt, and realized that the real victory had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about refusing to be invisible, about claiming my voice, and about creating a partnership that was unshakable because it was built on mutual respect, trust, and courage. And in that quiet reflection, I understood the truth of what happened at La Mirabelle, of the dinners, the exclusions, the subtle battles. Life would always present obstacles. People would test boundaries, ambitions would clash, but the courage to stand firm, the determination to demand respect, and the choice to act with integrity, those are the forces that define us. No table, no person, no circumstance could diminish what we had built together, not because we were flawless, but because we had learned to navigate imperfections, to embrace challenges, and to insist on visibility, agency, and respect. The luxury dinner, the initial exclusion, the tense confrontations were catalysts, not conclusions. And through them, I had learned that strength is not loud or ostentatious. It is quiet, consistent, and unapologetic. It is the refusal to disappear. As I turned off the lights and walked to our bedroom, Daniel beside me, I knew with absolute certainty that the journey ahead, full of opportunities, challenges, and new adventures, would be navigated together. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered, because we had chosen each other, and because I had learned that the door would always remain open when I refused to step back. In that moment, I felt it fully. Empowerment, love, resilience, and clarity. The kind that doesn't fade, doesn't waver, and doesn't require permission from anyone. And I whispered quietly to no one but myself, I am seen, I am heard, I belong, and that truth would guide every step of our journey forever.